Hello everyone, we are very glad to welcome Stefania Prandi on our video. Unfortunately, Stefania cannot be with us today like she was last year. You see on the screen the flyer of last year event when Stefania was here at the Rotonde to present her book and her investigation Oro Rosso on the exploitation of female workers in agriculture in the Mediterranean. So Stefania, we would like you to remind us, what have you discovered on that occasion when you made this research? Stefania is an award-winning journalist, photographer and writer, and this research received many awards and international recognition.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for having me today. Fragole is an investigation about female workers in the Mediterranean areas, female workers who work in the greenhouses and the fields. I discover that they are paid less than men, they are sexually harassed, coerced and raped. They work in the greenhouses and the fields where vegetables and fruits are grown to be exported internationally. So I started to investigate about these workers because when I used to go to groceries and supermarket, I used to ask to myself where both vegetables and fruits come from. After I heard about some cases of exploitation and violences and sexual violences in the south of Italy, in Sicily. I talked to workers from Romania, Bulgaria, Morocco, but also native, and I mean Italian, Spanish and Moroccan women who live in Morocco. And they told me that they are asked for sex in order to keep their jobs. So what I discovered in an investigation, a 3 years long investigation that I also did with my colleague, German colleague Pascal Müller, I discovered a widespread system of rape, blackmail, harassment and labor right abuses against these women. I made over 130 interviews to female workers, association, unionists, and I found out that a third of the women reported that have been sexually molested or raped by their superiors. Half of the women were physically abused and threatened, and all the women I met were verbally molested, abused, and humiliated. I decided to focus on female workers in the fields and greenhouses because media use and still use to focus on the exploitative condition of male migrants and native workers in the fields and greenhouses, and women were not and are not enough considered.
Yes, indeed, Stefania, you interviewed many women, listened to their stories. I think it took time to establish, the relationship, with these women so that they could open up with you, who were, a journalist, a photographer. So in order for them to come with their stories, I imagined that you were, you had several meetings, you heard the stories in detail. And as a photographer, you also took many pictures of these women. And later on, I would like to show on the screen some of these pictures. And it's always sensitive to take photographs of victims of violence, let's say. But you do it in a very sensitive way. You can explain better. I mean, your photos will explain also better.
These women, the women I met, are survivors because they experience, they are victims of violences, but they were also, they are really brave survivors because they were willing to talk to me and to my colleague, to Pascal Müller. And it was very important for us to collect their voices, because was a way to show also their resistance and their power, because they are not just passive victims, as sometimes we heard when we heard about violence against women. I took pictures of them, I portrayed them according with them, and we decided that I didn't show their faces, and every time I took a picture, a photo, I show them the picture in advance in order to ask them if I could keep it or delete it. So we can see some of the women I met. For example, this is Annalisa. Annalisa is not a real name. I changed the name because she asked me to have a different name, because she didn't want to be exposed to her community. Because this is another important thing. When a journalist goes in a place, then she goes or he goes, and then she leaves. But the person who stay in the place still live in the place and has to face with the consequences of an interview, and also with the consequence of the exposure of her name. So Annalisa is a seasonal worker. She has 3 children, and her husband is unemployed. And when I met her, she was working in the field picking grapes. She was harassed by her boss, and she refused to have sex with him, and she was fired. And then she was looking for another job, but for her it was very difficult to find another one, because when you refuse when you refuse the violence and the blackmail, then it's very difficult to find another place to go, because often bosses in the same places talk to each other, and they don't want to hire a woman who doesn't obey. Then I met other people, other women in Spain, in the south of Spain, in Huelva. And this is Nadia. She wanted to show her face because she wanted. She told me, I want to show people who I am and how is it my life while I collect strawberries that you find in supermarket and grocery shops. And Nadia told me that she was left with no other option but to eat dog food for 2 weeks. She was trapped in a greenhouse with other colleagues, and she had no car, she had no money for going to the grocery store, so she had to eat what she found in the place where she was supposed to live. And so she had to eat dog food. And it's unbelievable that this happened in Europe, I mean, in Spain, in the south of Europe. And this is Kalima. This is one of the most important person I met during my investigation. Here she is covering her face because she decided to report the violence, and she also decided to go to the police. And she was a really brave woman. But her courage was not awarded by the community, by us, because when she went to the hospital to provide evidences of the abuse, she was told by a doctor that without traces of sperm from the rapist, it would have been difficult to perform a DNA test and hence prove the rape. So she went to the police officer, but she was told that she had no enough proofs to make a trial, to try a trial.
Yes, this research was published in 2018. Since then, has there been, actions, collective action, results?
Yes, after our investigations, there were a lot of demonstrations in Spain, and a demonstration from Spanish people, but also from migrants people. In Huelva, for example, women farm workers from Morocco decide to take the streets, and they ask for more rights. And they went on the streets many times, and also during the lockdown, the past months, in the springtime, they also made their voices heard through unionists and some politicians. So they are still fighting against the violation of their rights.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important to talk about these problems and their stories, to show the individuals, the people, the women, the men who are behind these stories. Since the beginning of 2020, with the pandemic and with 2 or 3 months lockdown decided in many parts of Europe, I imagine that the situation has become even worse for migrant workers, for seasonal workers, farm workers in general. Do you have some figures, some research already on this, on the impact of the pandemic?
There were several surveys and investigations during the pandemic by journalists and by academic researchers. And what they told us is that during the lockdown, the situation for farm workers was very difficult. Around Europe, migrants and native farm workers complained about unpaid hours. They worked under tremendous pressure, and there were little water or protection for them. And some of them also said that they were fainting and vomiting for the exhaustion of a long day of work. As we already know, farm workers live in very bad housing conditions, and also spoke of cases of verbal, physical, and even sexual abuses. And we had different situations in different countries, but not only in the south of Europe. Also in Germany and Netherlands and the United Kingdom, the situation was very bad. For example, in Germany and Netherlands, there were complaining by migrant farm workers concerning wage deductions, housing condition, and violation of their rights. In several countries, there was a widespread worrying about a shortage of manpower during the pandemic. We all heard about the media, that we were all concerned as European citizens that there were not enough workers to pick up our vegetables.
Yeah. And sorry if I interrupt you, because I wanted really to link to what you were saying, because in one of the research that you provide us, there was this quote, which is really impressive. It was not a matter of shortage of workers in the field, but rather a shortage of workers' rights. This was, you know, the invisible problem. Can you elaborate on it?
Yes, we were told by the media system that there were not enough workers to pick up our vegetables, but in reality, what researcher told us is different. For example, according to Alessandra Corrado, professor at the University of Calabria, and Letizia Palumbo, a researcher at European University Institute in Florence, there was no labor shortage, but shortage of workers' rights. In some area of Italy, for example, the shortage of Eastern European labor has been offset by a reserve army of irregular migrant workers. What's happened is that the pandemic highlighted the dependence of the agri-food sector on cheap and flexible migrants and native workers. And this is one of the results of power imbalances in long supply chain. And what we know, for example, about Spain is that during the lockdown last spring, only around 7,000 Moroccan female workers could move to Spain before the borders were closed. And usually in the past year, there were 20,000 workers, Moroccan workers. So what we know is that a third of a usual number of workers had to cover all the works, all the jobs, and so they were really exploited. They working day equated 2 days in one, and they receive the normal hourly wage for overtime, and they were physically trapped in the greenhouses due to the lockdown measures.
Yes. So, Stefania, before closing our conversation, I would like to announce that we are going, Time for Equality, we are very proud to partner with you in preparing a series of workshops that we hold here in Luxembourg on this topic, work exploitation, forced labor, and what can be done at a different level. What is the solution? What can we do as citizens, as individuals, but also you know, as politicians, what can the society and politics do? Yeah, my last question was, what can we do based on the, you know, the experience we had so far? And even if it's a very difficult question, I mean, raising awareness, is it enough? Isn't there already a lot of awareness?
I think this is a question from which we can start for the workshops and for the next work we have to do, because it's not easy to answer to this question. But what I think is that everyone can do something. So, for example, as a journalist and as a photographer, my duty is to inform and to continue to talk about this issue, and people who work in education should educate the younger generation, and should talk and continue to inform about the issue of exploitation in the fields, and also sexual violence and work violence. And politicians should act in other ways at different level. And so I think that everyone can do something. But of course, we can do a workshop only about this.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stefania. All the best with your work and everything, and see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.